The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove, a neighborhood that prided itself on perfection. Each house stood like a carefully curated museum piece, pristine white siding, midnight blue shutters precisely aligned, lawns so uniformly green they looked like they'd been painted with automotive enamel. And at the center of this suburban tableau sat Elena Rodriguez's home, a slight deviation from the surrounding architectural monotony. Elena stood at her kitchen window, French press in hand, surveying the street with a mix of amusement and mild contempt. She'd been a resident of Maple Grove for 3 years of navigating the unspoken rules that governed this meticulously manicured community. As a corporate litigation attorney, she was no stranger to complex systems of control. But the Maple Grove Homeowners Association presented a challenge unlike any she'd encountered in her professional life. The house had been her sanctuary, her escape from the cutthroat world of corporate law. A mid-century modern design with clean lines and expansive windows, it stood as a testament to her personal style. Functional, elegant, with just a hint of rebellion. Where other homes in the neighborhood looked like carbon copies, Elena's home breathed individuality. The large windows weren't just architectural features, they were statements. The exterior's soft sage green, a color that had nearly triggered a neighborhood-wide meltdown when she first painted it, harmonized with the surrounding landscape in a way the stark white of her neighbors never could. Her phone buzzed. Another email from the HOA. Elena's lips curled into a sardonic smile as she swiped open the message. Victor Hartman, the HOA board president, had outdone himself this time. A 3-paragraph missive about the unauthorized botanical elements visible from the street. Apparently, her carefully curated native plant garden was causing significant aesthetic disruption to the established neighborhood visual standard. She remembered the day she'd first met Victor, a thin, reed-like man in his mid-60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual look of disapproval. He'd cornered her at the annual neighborhood barbecue, clipboard in hand, questioning her about the unconventional landscaping choices she was making. Ms. Rodriguez, he'd said, his voice a mixture of bureaucratic authority and barely concealed disdain. A neighborhood is a collective expression. Individual whims must be tempered by community standards. Elena had laughed, a sharp, professional laugh that made several nearby conversations stop mid-sentence. Mr. Hartman, she'd responded, a community is defined by its diversity, not its uniformity. The battle lines were drawn that day, though neither of them knew how deeply the conflict would eventually run. Her garden was more than just plants. It was an ecosystem. Native wildflowers that supported local pollinators, a small vegetable plot that challenged the idea of purely ornamental landscaping, a greenhouse that caught the morning light just perfectly. Where Victor saw chaos, Elena saw potential. Where he saw rules to be enforced, she saw opportunities to reimagine suburban living. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a monarch butterfly drifted between her wildflowers, a splash of orange against the green. In the distance, she could see Margaret Thompson, her retired teacher neighbor, watching from behind her perfectly trimmed curtains. Margaret had always been something of an outsider in Maple Grove, supportive but cautious. Elena knew the HOA's next move was coming. Victor Hartman was not the type to let a challenge go unanswered, and she was not the type to back down. The first rays of morning sunlight caught the edge of her desk, a meticulously organized space that held both her professional legal documents and her carefully drawn plans for expanding the garden. Something told her she would need every ounce of her legal expertise in the coming weeks. Maple Grove had no idea what was about to hit it. The first violation notice arrived like a declaration of war, crisp and official, nestled between a Pottery Barn catalog and a local real estate market update. Elena Rodriguez recognized Victor Hartman's meticulously formatted letterhead before she even read the contents. The HOA's logo, a perfectly symmetrical house icon that looked more like a geometric abstraction than any real home, seemed to mock her from the top of the page. Unauthorized landscaping modifications, the header proclaimed in bold, authoritative typeface. She read the document twice, her corporate litigation training kicking in. Each word was a calculated attempt to intimidate, to force compliance through bureaucratic language. The list of infractions read like a comprehensive attack on her entire approach to gardening. Non-conforming plant species detected. Excessive botanical diversity compromising neighborhood aesthetic standards. Potential attraction of undesirable wildlife. Violation of Section 4.2, Landscape Uniformity Guidelines. Alina's greenhouse stood as the primary point of contention. What she considered a sustainable urban ecosystem, the HOA saw as an architectural abomination. The small glass structure, carefully positioned to maximize sunlight and minimize environmental impact, had become ground zero for their ideological warfare. Inside the greenhouse, a carefully curated ecosystem thrived. Native milkweed plants provided sanctuary for monarch butterflies. Heirloom tomato varieties hung heavy on their vines, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the sterile uniformity of Maple Grove's manicured landscapes. Pollinator-friendly wildflowers created a miniature biodiversity hotspot that was both beautiful and functional. Victor Hartman saw none of this beauty. To him, the greenhouse was a blight, an unauthorized structure that challenged everything the Maple Grove HOA represented. The timing was no coincidence. Late spring, when gardens were supposed to burst into life, had become a battlefield. Alina knew the HOA had been watching, collecting evidence, building their case. Her neighbors' pristine lawns, chemically treated monocultures of Kentucky bluegrass, stood in perfect geometric rows. Her garden was a rebellion, a living, breathing ecosystem that refused to conform. Margaret Thompson, her retired teacher neighbor, was the first to approach her about the notice. She appeared at Alina's doorstep that afternoon, a casserole in hand, the universal suburban peace offering. "They're really going after you this time," Margaret said, her voice a mixture of concern and barely concealed excitement. At 67, she'd seen her share of neighborhood disputes, but nothing quite like this. Alina invited her in, brewing a pot of single-origin Ethiopian coffee, another small act of rebellion against the neighborhood's mass-produced Folgers culture. The kitchen, like the rest of her home, was a carefully curated space that spoke to her personality, functional, elegant, with unexpected touches of creativity. Victor Hartman believes he's protecting the neighborhood's integrity, Alina explained, her fingers tracing the edge of the violation notice. But what he's really doing is enforcing a type of aesthetic colonialism. These gardens are living systems, not museum exhibits. Margaret nodded, understanding more than she let on. As a former biology teacher, she appreciated the ecological complexity of Alina's approach. "The monarchs love your milkweed," she said with a subtle smile. "I've been tracking their migration patterns for years." Their conversation was interrupted by the distinct sound of a clipboard-wielding individual walking up the front path. Alina recognized the measured, almost militaristic stride of Victor Hartman before she saw him. He didn't bother knocking. Instead, he began taking photographs of the front yard, his movements precise and calculated. A digital camera hung from his neck, additional lenses tucked into a utility vest that screamed amateur enforcement officer. "Mr. Hartman," Alina called through the window, "I hope you have a proper photography permit for private property." The old man startled, his carefully composed facade cracking for just a moment. Margaret chuckled softly, enjoying the minor victory. Victor recovered quickly. "These documentation efforts are within the HOA's rights. Ms. Rodriguez, your landscaping represents a clear and present danger to our community standards." Danger? Alina's lawyer brain was already constructing counter-arguments. These are native plants supporting local ecosystems. The only danger is the environmental damage caused by your prescribed lawn treatments. The confrontation was just beginning. What Victor didn't realize was that Alina Rodriguez was not just going to fight. She was going to deconstruct every single one of the HOA's arguments with the precision of a surgical strike. The casserole grew cold on the kitchen counter. Outside, a monarch butterfly drifted between the milkweed plants, completely unaware of the human drama unfolding around its sanctuary. Maple Grove would never be the same. The Rodriguez home became a fortress of resistance. Legal books and environmental research papered every available surface: dining room table, home office desk, even the kitchen counter. Elena worked with the precision of a surgeon, each document a carefully crafted weapon in her upcoming battle with the Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Her response was nothing short of a legal masterpiece. 12 pages of meticulously researched arguments, each paragraph a calculated strike against the HOA's narrow-minded regulations. She began with a comprehensive overview of local environmental ordinances, citing specific municipal codes that protected native landscaping and sustainable gardening practices. Citations from ecological journals lined the margins, transforming what could have been a simple dispute into a scholarly treatise on urban biodiversity. The document was more than a defense. It was a declaration of war. She could every board member, every homeowner, and filed copies with the local municipal office. Digital copies were uploaded to community forums, shared across neighborhood email lists. Elena understood the power of visibility, of turning a private dispute into a public conversation. Across Maple Grove, dinner tables became battlegrounds of discussion. The Rodriguez Garden, as it was now known, became the most talked about topic since the neighborhood's controversial speed bump installation 5 years prior. Margaret Thompson became her unexpected ally. The retired biology teacher began leaving supportive notes in Elena's mailbox, each one a carefully worded piece of encouragement. Pressed between the notes were newspaper clippings about urban ecology, native plant preservation, and the critical role of residential gardens in supporting local ecosystems. "They're talking about you at the community center," Margaret confided during one of her afternoon visits. She brought homemade lemon bars, a peace offering and a show of solidarity. "Some support you. Some think you're trying to destroy the neighborhood's character." The neighborhood was splitting into factions. The old guard, predominantly older residents who had lived in Maple Grove for decades, saw Elena as a troublemaker. Younger families, particularly those with environmental interests, began to view her as a potential hero. Social media became a battleground. Next-door threads erupted in heated debates. Facebook groups dedicated to the neighborhood dissolved into argumentative comment sections. Screenshots of Elena's detailed response were shared, dissected, praised, and criticized. Victor Hartman had not anticipated this level of resistance. His weekly HOA board meeting became a heated affair, with Elena's comprehensive document passed around like a ticking time bomb. The usually stoic board members found themselves on the defensive, challenged by arguments they couldn't easily dismiss. "We can't just ignore this," said Janet Reynolds, the board's secretary. A real estate agent by profession, she understood the potential public relations nightmare brewing. "If we're not careful, this could impact property values." Victor's face reddened. He had built his entire persona around the idea of maintaining order, of protecting the neighborhood's pristine image. Elena Rodriguez was threatening everything he had carefully constructed over decades. Behind the scenes, legal consultations were happening. The HOA's own legal counsel began to express concerns about the strength of Elena's arguments. Municipal environmental protection laws were complex, and Elena had left no stone unturned in her research. At the local coffee shop, whispers grew. Some residents began to see Elena not as a troublemaker, but as a potential catalyst for change. The Rodriguez Garden became more than just a landscaping dispute. It was becoming a symbol of individual rights versus collective control. Margaret watched it all with a knowing smile. She had seen neighborhood dynamics shift before, but never quite like this. Elena Rodriguez was different. She wasn't just fighting a battle. She was starting a revolution. As sunset painted Maple Grove in soft oranges and pinks, Elena sat in her greenhouse. Monarch butterflies drifted between milkweed plants. A hummingbird hovered near a native flowering plant. This was more than a garden. This was a statement. The first battle had been fought, and Elena Rodriguez was just getting started. The moonless night seemed to swallow Maple Grove whole. Street lamps cast weak pools of light, creating shadows that stretched and merged between meticulously manicured lawns. Most residents were asleep, unaware of the operation about to unfold on Willow Lane. Victor Hartman had assembled his most trusted allies, a motley crew of retired military personnel, overzealous retirees, and board members who saw the Rodriguez Garden as a personal affront to everything they held sacred. They gathered in the Thompson family's abandoned garage, a location carefully chosen for its proximity to Alina's property and its complete lack of surveillance. "This isn't just about a garden," Victor whispered, spreading out a hand-drawn map of Alina's property. His thin fingers traced the boundaries, marking potential points of entry. "This is about maintaining the integrity of Maple Grove." Seated around him were Frank Garrison, a retired military police officer with a crew cut and perpetual scowl, and Linda Prescott, the HOA's most ardent rule enforcer. They had brought an arsenal of equipment that looked more suited to a covert government operation than a neighborhood dispute: high-powered flashlights, measuring tapes, clipboards, and digital cameras with night vision capabilities. Frank leaned forward, his voice gravelly. "We'll document every single violation, measure every plant, photograph every unauthorized structure. Rodriguez won't know what hit her." The plan was meticulously detailed. They would enter Alina's property under the cover of darkness, collect evidence of landscaping violations, and document everything with military precision. Victor had spent weeks studying the property, noting every potential infraction, every deviation from the HOA's strict landscaping guidelines. What they didn't know was that Alina Rodriguez was always one step ahead. Her security system was a marvel of modern technology, a network of high-resolution cameras with night vision, motion sensors, and direct links to her smartphone. The system had been installed by a former client, a cybersecurity expert who understood the importance of comprehensive protection. As the group approached, carefully cutting through a section of hedgerow, the first camera captured their movements. Night vision revealed their careful steps, the measuring tapes, the clipboards. Each movement was recorded in crystal-clear detail. Frank Garrison moved with the precision of a trained operative, measuring the height of Alina's native grasses. Linda Prescott photographed the greenhouse, her flash momentarily illuminating their intrusion. Victor watched from the periphery, a clipboard clutched to his chest like a sacred text. They trampled delicate wildflower patches, measuring and documenting with a zealotry that bordered on obsession. A monarch butterfly, disturbed from its resting place, fluttered weakly in the night air, a small casualty of their crusade. Inside her home, Alina watched. Her smartphone lit up with a series of notifications. The security system was recording everything: timestamps, GPS coordinates, individual movements. This was no longer just a garden dispute. This was a criminal trespass. Margaret Thompson, who lived next door, witnessed part of the operation from her bedroom window. An old-school Polaroid camera sat on her nightstand, a relic from her teaching days that now served as an unexpected witness. As dawn approached, the group retreated. Victor Hartman allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. They had collected their evidence. They had proven their point. They had no idea what was coming. Alina Rodriguez was not the type to let such a blatant violation go unchallenged. The evidence was clear. The intrusion was documented, and she was about to turn their covert operation into the most public spectacle Maple Grove had ever seen. The first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. A new day was beginning in Maple Grove, and nothing would ever be the same. The evidence spread across Alina Rodriguez's dining room table looked like something between a legal brief and an investigative journalist's case. High-resolution security camera prints, time-stamped video footage, GPS coordinates, a comprehensive documentation of the HOA's midnight invasion. Her laptop screen flickered with the uploaded video, each frame a damning piece of evidence. Victor Hartman and his team moved like amateur spies through her garden, trampling native plants, measuring with a zealotry that bordered on criminal trespass. A local tech-savvy friend had helped her enhance the footage, ensuring every detail was crystal clear. "This goes beyond a simple HOA violation," Alina muttered, reviewing the documentation for the 100th time. The local community Facebook group became her first tactical deployment. With surgical precision, she uploaded the entire video, accompanied by a detailed narrative that read like a legal indictment. The post began, "What happens when a homeowners association believes it's above the law? Last night, members of the Maple Grove HOA board conducted an unauthorized, invasive operation on my private property." Within hours, the post exploded. Likes turned into hundreds. Shares multiplied exponentially. Comments flooded in from current and former HOA residents, environmental activists, and local community members who had long harbored their own frustrations with overzealous neighborhood associations. Local media caught wind of the story by mid-afternoon. The local news station, always hungry for a compelling narrative, sent a reporter to investigate. Sarah Chin, an investigative journalist known for her exposes on community power structures, arrived with a full camera crew. "This isn't just about a garden," Sarah told Elena during the interview. "This is about power, control, and the fundamental rights of homeowners." The video told a story more compelling than any written report. Victor Hartman, captured in high-definition night vision, looked less like a concerned community leader and more like a petty bureaucrat conducting an invasive operation. His team's movements seemed calculated, almost militaristic in their precision. Margaret Thompson watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of excitement and vindication. She had seen neighborhood power dynamics shift before, but never quite like this. Her own experiences as a teacher, challenging systemic rules, standing up for students, resonated with Elena's fight. The HOA board went into crisis mode. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers were consulted. Victor Hartman, typically so composed, found himself fielding angry phone calls from board members and homeowners alike. "We can't let this narrative get away from us," Janet Reynolds, the board's secretary, warned during an emergency session. "If this goes viral, it could destroy everything we've built." But it was too late. The story had already escaped their control. Social media became a battleground. Nextdoor threads erupted. Local community groups shared the video. Screenshots of the HOA's nighttime operation spread like wildfire. Some neighbors who had previously been silent began to speak out. Tales of similar HOA overreaches emerged: petty citations, unreasonable fines, invasive inspections. Elena's fight had become a symbol of resistance against bureaucratic overreach. The municipal office began receiving calls. Local environmental groups reached out, offering support. What had started as a simple garden dispute was transforming into a broader conversation about individual rights, community standards, and the role of homeowners associations. Victor Hartman's carefully constructed reputation began to crumble. The video showed him not as a protector of community standards, but as an overzealous enforcer willing to violate personal boundaries. As sunset painted Maple Grove in soft oranges and pinks, Elena sat in her greenhouse. Monarch butterflies drifted between milkweed plants, seemingly unaware of the human drama unfolding around them. A hummingbird hovered near a native flowering plant. This was more than a garden dispute now. This was a revolution, and it was just beginning. Maple Grove had never been a community of fence-sitters, but the Rodriguez Garden incident, as it was now known, pushed the neighborhood into full-blown ideological warfare. The community center became ground zero for the conflict. What was supposed to be a routine monthly HOA meeting transformed into a packed, tension-filled event that resembled a political rally more than a neighborhood gathering. Fire marshals had to monitor the crowd capacity, with residents spilling out into the parking lot, some unable to find seats inside. Elena Rodriguez arrived precisely at 7:00 p.m., dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of her professional background. She carried a meticulously organized binder, evidence, research, and legal documentation that would make even the most seasoned lawyer proud. Margaret Thompson sat beside her, a silent but powerful ally, her decades of teaching experience radiating a quiet confidence. Victor Hartman looked smaller than ever. The once imposing HOA president now seemed diminished, crushed under the weight of public scrutiny and mounting criticism. The room divided itself into clear factions. On one side sat the old guard, longtime residents who believed in absolute conformity, men in pressed khakis and women with perfectly coiffed hair, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and fear. They saw Elena as a threat to everything they had carefully constructed over decades. Opposite them, a growing coalition of younger families, environmental advocates, and progressive homeowners showed their support. They wore buttons with slogans like "Native Plants Matter" and "Community over Conformity." Smartphones were ready to live stream every moment of the meeting. Janet Reynolds, the HOA board's secretary, attempted to maintain order. Her real estate agent's training kicked in, diplomatic but visibly stressed. "We will hear all perspectives," she announced, her voice wavering slightly, "but we must maintain decorum." The first speaker was a retired engineer named Robert Klein, one of Victor's staunchest supporters. "This is about more than a garden," he declared, his voice thundering through the hall. "This is about maintaining the standards that make Maple Grove special. One unconventional landscape leads to chaos." The room erupted. Half of the attendees applauded, the other half jeered. Elena waited. She understood the power of strategic silence. When she finally spoke, the room fell completely quiet. Her voice was calm, measured, the voice of a seasoned litigation attorney who knew exactly how to dismantle an argument. "This isn't about chaos," she began. "This is about adaptation, about understanding that our relationship with the environment isn't static. The monoculture lawns we've maintained for decades are ecological deserts. My garden isn't just aesthetically pleasing. It's a functioning ecosystem that supports local wildlife, reduces water consumption, and challenges us to think differently about our shared spaces." Scientific studies materialized in her presentation. Research about native plant biodiversity, climate change impact reports, economic analyses showing the long-term benefits of sustainable landscaping. The younger families leaned forward, captivated. The older residents shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Thompson's presence was a subtle but powerful endorsement. As a respected former educator, her silent support carried significant weight. Outside the community center, the neighborhood was changing. Conversations happened over fences. Neighborhood group chats buzzed with debate. Children listened to their parents discuss ecological responsibility, property rights, community standards. Some neighbors began looking at their own lawns differently. Perfectly manicured grass suddenly seemed less appealing. The first signs of change were subtle. A native plant here, a pollinator-friendly flower bed there. Victor Hartman watched in horror as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. This was more than a dispute about a garden. This was a revolution. And revolutions, once started, are nearly impossible to stop. The courthouse conference room was a study in tension. Polished mahogany tables reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting, creating an atmosphere that was simultaneously professional and oppressive. Elena Rodriguez sat at the center, her legal brief a weapon more precise than any sword. This was no longer just a dispute about a garden. This was a comprehensive assault on the Maple Grove Homeowners Association's entire system of governance. Her lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal strategy. 12 counts that range from illegal trespass to environmental violations, each argument meticulously documented, each claim supported by expert testimony and irrefutable evidence. The HOA's lawyers shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were facing an opponent who was not just prepared, but determined to dismantle their entire organizational structure. Victor Hartman looked smaller than ever. The once proud HOA president now seemed diminished, crushed under the weight of legal scrutiny and public humiliation. His carefully pressed suit hung loosely on his frame, a testament to the stress of the past weeks. "Count one," Elena began, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "addresses the fundamental violation of private property rights. The HOA's midnight invasion was not just inappropriate. It was a criminal act of trespass." The evidence was damning. High-resolution security footage showed Victor and his team trampling native plants, measuring without permission, violating not just HOA guidelines, but basic legal protections of private property. Expert witnesses were prepared to testify about the ecological value of her garden, transforming the lawsuit from a simple property dispute into a broader conversation about environmental sustainability. Margaret Thompson sat in the back of the room, a silent but powerful presence. She had brought her own documentation, decades of ecological research, photographs documenting the decline of local pollinators, studies about the importance of native plant ecosystems. The legal team representing the HOA had clearly underestimated Elena. They expected a simple dispute. Instead, they found themselves facing a comprehensive legal and ecological assault that threatened to expose every systemic flaw in their organization. Janet Reynolds, the HOA board's secretary, looked like she might be sick. She understood the implications better than anyone. This lawsuit wasn't just about Elena Rodriguez's garden. This was an existential threat to the entire system of neighborhood governance they had carefully constructed. Expert witnesses lined up to support Elena's case. Dr. Rebecca Chen, an urban ecology expert from the State University, brought extensive research about the critical role of residential gardens in supporting local biodiversity. Her testimony painted Elena's garden not as a violation, but as a model of sustainable urban landscaping. A local environmental lawyer detailed the municipal codes that protected native landscaping, systematically dismantling the HOA's claims about aesthetic standards. A wildlife conservation specialist brought photographs of monarch butterflies and native pollinators thriving in Elena's garden, living proof of its ecological value. The lawsuit demanded not just damages, but systemic change. Elena sought to fundamentally reshape how HOAs could interact with homeowners' ecological choices. She wanted court-mandated guidelines that protected individual property rights while promoting environmental sustainability. Victor Hartman's lawyers tried to mount a defense, but it was like watching a sandcastle attempt to withstand a tsunami. Each of their arguments was systematically dismantled, each claim exposed as petty and fundamentally flawed. The media watched with rapt attention. Local news outlets, environmental blogs, and community journals saw this as more than a local dispute. This was a landmark case that could reshape how residential communities approached landscaping, property rights, and environmental responsibility. As the first day of depositions concluded, Elena knew that the settlement arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet transformation that would reshape Maple Grove forever. 6 months after the lawsuit's initial filing, the courthouse conference room looked different. Where tension had once dominated, a sense of collaborative possibility now filled the space. Elena Rodriguez sat at the center, no longer as an adversary, but as a catalyst for change. The court-mandated restructuring of the Maple Grove Homeowners Association was comprehensive. Gone were the rigid, punitive guidelines that had defined the neighborhood for decades. In their place, a new framework emerged, one that balanced community aesthetics with environmental responsibility, individual expression with collective harmony. Victor Hartman was gone, not just from the HOA board, but from the neighborhood entirely. The public exposure, the legal defeat, had been too much. He'd sold his house and moved to a retirement community in Florida, a defeated man who had become a cautionary tale of bureaucratic overreach. The new HOA bylaws read like a manifesto of progressive community design. Native plant gardens were no longer prohibited. They were encouraged. Homeowners received incentives for creating eco-friendly landscapes. Water conservation techniques became a point of neighborhood pride rather than a source of conflict. Margaret Thompson found herself appointed to a newly created Environmental Advisory Committee. Her decades of teaching and ecological knowledge finally found an official platform. She worked closely with Elena, translating scientific research into practical community guidelines. The transformation wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Young families began moving into Maple Grove, attracted by its newfound reputation as an innovative, environmentally conscious community. Real estate values, contrary to Victor's old warnings, actually increased. Sustainable landscaping became a selling point, not a point of contention. Elena's original garden became a neighborhood landmark. Local schools began bringing students on field trips, learning about urban ecology, native plant systems, and the importance of individual action in environmental conservation. The first annual Maple Grove Biodiversity Day became a community celebration. Neighbors who had once been divided now worked together, planting native gardens, creating pollinator corridors, sharing ecological knowledge. Janet Reynolds, the former HOA secretary, found redemption in the new system. She became a key advocate for the transformative approach, using her real estate expertise to promote the neighborhood's new ecological ethos. At the community center where the pivotal meeting had once divided the neighborhood, a large display now celebrated the transformation. Photographs documented the journey, from Victor Hartman's rigid enforcement to Elena's revolutionary garden. A timeline showed the legal battle, the settlement, and the neighborhood's rebirth. Scientific studies began to use Maple Grove as a case study. Urban planners, environmental researchers, and community development experts studied how a single garden and a single determined homeowner could create systemic change. Alina Rodriguez became more than just a resident. She became a symbol of responsible citizenship, of the power of individual action to create meaningful change. On the one-year anniversary of the lawsuit's settlement, a community gathering celebrated the transformation. Margaret Thompson gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes, speaking about adaptation, resilience, and the importance of seeing beyond rigid rules. "We didn't just change a neighborhood," she told the crowd. "We changed how we think about community." Alina stood at the back of the room watching. Her garden, now a complex, thriving ecosystem, had become more than just a personal space. It was a statement, a promise, a blueprint for a different way of living. Monarch butterflies drifted between native milkweed plants. A hummingbird hovered near a flowering plant. The garden that had once been a point of conflict was now a symbol of possibility. Maple Grove would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. Epilogue. Sometimes, the most revolutionary acts begin with something as simple as planting a seed.